January 28, 1994. A recording studio in Seattle. Two members of the world's biggest rock band are waiting. But their frontman, Kurt Cobain, never shows up. He doesn't show up the next day either. For 48 hours, Dave Grohl and Krist Novoselic sit in that studio, wondering if their band is falling apart. Then, on the third day, Kurt finally walks through the door. He looks different, distant, broken. What happened in the next few hours would become one of the most devastating moments in music history. Kurt recorded one song, just one. 65 days later, he was gone. Dave Grohl would later say it's almost impossible to listen to. Kurt was unwell, he admitted. He was in a place we may not have recognized. Subscribe now, because the truth about Kurt Cobain's final recording will shatter everything you thought you knew about his last days. The problem becomes clear immediately. Kurt has no gear. For any musician, this is strange. But for Kurt Cobain, a man whose sound defined a generation, showing up to record without his equipment is more than strange. It's a signal. A warning sign that nobody wants to acknowledge. Ernie Bailey, Kurt's guitar technician, scrambles to save the session. He runs out to his car and grabs a Univox guitar, a cheap, unconventional instrument that he'd been modifying for Kurt. It's not the guitar Kurt usually plays. It's not the battered Fender Jaguar or Mustang that created the sound of Smells Like Teen Spirit or Come As You Are. But it's all we have. The studio's Marshall 50-watt combo amp sits in the corner. Kurt plugs in and immediately grimaces. He hates this amp. The tone is wrong. Everything feels wrong. But he doesn't complain. He doesn't demand his usual setup. He just accepts it with a quiet resignation that unsettles everyone in the room. Adam Casper and Ernie work frantically to set up a pedal board. They manage to configure a Boss distortion pedal, not Kurt's preferred model, but close enough. "We got close to something he was okay with," Ernie would later say. "Not great. Not perfect. Just okay." This is not how legendary albums are made. This is not how a band at the peak of their powers operates. This feels like something else entirely. This feels like a man going through the motions because he doesn't have the energy to care anymore. Dave sits behind his drum kit, watching. Krist tunes his bass, stealing glances at Kurt. The tension in Robert Lang Studios is suffocating. We've waited 2 days for this moment, and now that Kurt is here, nobody knows what to say. Then the jam begins. For 20 minutes, Nirvana just plays. No structure. No plan. Just three musicians who've spent years together, finding their way back to each other through sound. I can hear fragments of old songs in the noise. At one point, Kurt plays the riff from Verse Chorus Verse, a song that never made it onto an album. It's like he's reaching back through his own catalog, searching for something he's lost. The jam is raw, chaotic, beautiful in its messiness. For those 20 minutes, it almost feels like the old Nirvana. The band that played dive bars in Seattle. The band that made music because they had to, not because millions of people were watching. But then Kurt stops playing. "Why don't we do that song we've been doing at soundcheck?" he suggests. Dave and Krist nod. They know the song he's talking about. They've been working on it during soundchecks throughout the In Utero tour. It doesn't have a name yet. It's just a rough sketch, a quiet verse that explodes into a screaming chorus. The kind of structure Nirvana has perfected over the years. Adam Casper writes on the tracking sheet, Kurt's tune number 1. They rehearse it once. Just once. Then Adam hits record. What happens next will become the most controversial, most painful, most debated recording in Nirvana's entire catalog. But in this moment, none of us know that. In this moment, it's just a band making music. Kurt counts them in. Dave's drums crash like thunder. Krist's bass rumbles beneath. And then Kurt's guitar cuts through everything with a sound so raw, so desperate, that it makes my chest tighten. The song is called You Know You're Right. And Kurt Cobain is singing like a man who knows he's running out of time. But there's something else in his voice. Something none of us will understand until it's too late. He's not just singing. He's confessing. The instrumental track takes 3 attempts. 3 takes to capture the quiet loud quiet dynamics that Nirvana built their reputation on. The verses are almost whispered, Kurt's guitar barely audible, creating space for something darker to emerge. Then the chorus hits like a freight train. Distortion. Rage. Pain compressed into sound. By the third take, they have it. The performance is tight despite the borrowed equipment and the 2-day delay. Dave's drumming is ferocious. Christ's bass provides the foundation. Kurt's guitar work is jagged and raw. But we still don't have vocals. After laying down the instrumental, Kurt does something unusual. He lies down on the studio's cool marble floor. His back has been hurting for years, chronic pain that no doctor has been able to solve. The pain that drove him to heroin in the first place. The pain that's been slowly destroying him. Robert Lang watches from the control room. I could tell his back was hurting him, he remembers. He had some pain. For several minutes, Kurt just lies there on the cold floor. Eyes closed. Breathing slowly. The studio is silent except for the hum of equipment. Dave and Christ give him space. They've learned not to push. They've learned that Kurt operates on his own timeline, in his own way. Then Kurt stands up. He walks to the microphone. Adam and Robert set up speakers instead of headphones because Kurt hates wearing headphones. They place the speakers out of phase so Kurt can hear the music around him instead of inside his head. Ready when you are, Adam says through the talkback. Kurt nods. The instrumental track begins. And then Kurt Cobain opens his mouth and sings. One take. That's all it takes. The lyrics pour out of him like they've been trapped inside for years. His voice cracks with emotion. In the verses, he sounds vulnerable, almost pleading. Then the chorus erupts and Kurt is screaming. Not singing, screaming, as if the words are ripping their way out of his throat. I will never bother you / I will never promise to / I will never follow you / I will never bother you / never speak a word again / I will crawl away for good. The words are devastating. A man erasing himself. A man promising to disappear. But it's the final line of each chorus that will haunt everyone who hears this song. You know you're right. He sings it with such resignation, such defeat, that it feels less like a lyric and more like a surrender. An admission. An acceptance of some terrible truth that only Kurt understands. When the take is finished, Kurt adds 2 vocal overdubs. Quick passes to layer his voice, to add depth to the screaming sections. The whole vocal session takes less than an hour. In the control room, Adam and Robert exchange glances. They've just witnessed something extraordinary. Something painful. Something that feels too intimate, too raw for the world to hear. Dave sits at his drum kit, staring at the floor. Years later, he'll say, I used to think it sounded like he was singing the chorus. Now I listen to it and it's like he's wailing. Krist Novoselic will confirm that very few changes were made to the mix. Maybe a little bit of compression and a little bit of reverb, he'll say. The song didn't need production tricks. It was already perfect in its brokenness. At the end of the session, the band is pleased. They told me it was the quickest and fastest recording they'd ever done, Robert Lang remembers. But there's something none of us can shake. A feeling that we've just witnessed something final. Kurt packs up the borrowed guitar. He thanks everyone quietly. And then he leaves Robert Lang Studios. He will never record music again. For years, You Know You're Right existed only as a rumor. On October 23, 1993, months before the studio recording, Nirvana performed the song once at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. The audience recording was terrible. Bootleggers labeled it with wrong titles, On a Mountain, Autopilot. They had misheard Dave Grohl's introduction. He had said, This is our last song, it's called All Apologies, but Kurt had already started playing something else. That live performance was chaotic, raw, unfinished. But the studio version from January 30th, 1994 was different. Focused. Complete. Devastating. After the recording session, Krist Novoselic took the 2-inch master tapes home with him. They sat in his basement for 4 years. Nobody talked about them. Nobody knew what to do with them. Because 65 days after that recording session, Kurt Cobain was dead. The timeline of those 65 days reads like a descent into hell. February 1994. Nirvana embarks on a European tour. Kurt's health deteriorates rapidly. Doctors diagnose bronchitis and severe laryngitis. They tell him to rest. He ignores them and continues performing. March 1st, 1994. Nirvana plays their final concert in Munich, Germany. Kurt's voice is shredded. He can barely hit the high notes on Heart-Shaped Box. The encore ends with feedback and a quiet thank you to the audience. It's the last time Kurt Cobain will ever sing in public. March 4th, 1994. In Rome, Kurt mixes champagne with Rohypnol, a powerful sedative. He falls into a coma. Courtney Love finds him and calls for help. He spends 20 hours unconscious in a Roman hospital. When he wakes up, he tells people it was an accident. But a note found in the hotel room suggests otherwise. Like Hamlet, I have to choose between life and death. March 30th, 1994. After an intervention by Courtney and friends, Kurt checks into a rehab facility in Los Angeles. He stays for 2 days. April 1st, 1994. Kurt walks out of rehab against medical advice. He tells people he needs cigarettes. He never returns. For the next few days, nobody knows where he is. April 3rd, 1994. Courtney Love hires a private detective to find Kurt. The detective makes contact with him in Seattle, but Kurt refuses to come back to Los Angeles. April 5th, 1994. Kurt Cobain dies of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in the greenhouse above his garage at his home on Lake Washington Boulevard. But his body isn't found for 3 days. During those 3 days, life continues as if Kurt is still alive. Nirvana pulls out of Lollapalooza 1994 on April 7th, but nobody says why. Rumors circulate that the band is breaking up. Nobody knows the truth. On April 8th, 1994, an electrician named Gary Smith arrives at Kurt's home to install a security system. He enters the greenhouse and finds Kurt's body. A shotgun lies nearby. A suicide note is propped against a planter. The note is addressed to Bada, Kurt's childhood imaginary friend. In it, Kurt writes about losing his passion for music, about not feeling the excitement of creating anymore, about being unable to continue. I haven't felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing, for too many years now, the note reads. But there's one piece of evidence that nobody talks about. One recording that holds the key to understanding Kurt's final state of mind. The song from January 30th, 1994. The song recorded 65 days before his death. You Know You're Right. The song where Kurt sang, over and over, I will crawl away for good. It wasn't a song. It was a warning. And nobody heard it until it was too late. After Kurt's death, You Know You're Right became a ghost. Krist Novoselic and Dave Grohl wanted to release it as part of a box set, a proper farewell to Nirvana, a way to honor Kurt's final creative moment. But Courtney Love had other plans. In 2001, Love blocked the release. She argued that a recording of such extraordinary artistic and commercial value shouldn't be buried in an expensive box set that only hardcore fans would buy. She wanted it on a mainstream compilation, accessible to everyone, a final gift to the millions who mourned Kurt. The legal battle that followed was vicious. Krist and Dave felt betrayed. This was Nirvana's music. Their final recording together. How could Courtney, who wasn't even in the band, control its fate? But Courtney owned Kurt's estate. She controlled his share of Nirvana's catalog. And she refused to compromise. For months, the three of them fought through lawyers and press statements. Fans watched in horror as Kurt's legacy became a battleground. The people who loved him most couldn't agree on how to honor him. Finally, in September 2002, someone leaked You Know You're Right onto the internet. Within hours, the song was everywhere. Radio stations put it into heavy rotation despite having no official permission. Fans downloaded it by the millions. The leak forced everyone's hand. On October 8, 2002, 8.5 years after it was recorded, You Know You're Right was officially released as the lead single from Nirvana's greatest hits compilation. The world finally heard Kurt Cobain's last words. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The song debuted at #1 on Billboard's Modern Rock Tracks chart, where it stayed for 4 consecutive weeks. Even in death, even after 8 years of silence, Kurt's voice still had the power to dominate. Critics called it heartbreaking, devastating, impossible to listen to without crying. Rolling Stone wrote that it sounded like a man saying goodbye. NME described Kurt's vocals as a primal scream of despair. But for the people who were in that studio on January 30th, 1994, listening to the song wasn't cathartic. It was torture. Dave Grohl avoided it for years. When he finally listened to it again in 2017, he told The Guardian, "Oh God, it's hard to listen to." It was not a pleasant time for the band. Kurt was unwell. Then he was well. Then he was unwell. The last year of the band was tough. He added, "I used to think it sounded like he was singing the chorus. Now I listen to it and it's like he's wailing." Robert Lang, the studio owner, remembered Kurt's back pain, his borrowed guitar, the single vocal take. "They told me it was the quickest and fastest recording they'd ever done," he said. But there was nothing quick about the pain in Kurt's voice. Adam Kasper, the producer, spoke about how raw the recording was. How little they had to do to it. Very few changes were made to the original mix, Chris Novoselic confirmed. Maybe a little bit of compression and a little bit of reverb. The song didn't need production. It didn't need studio magic. It was already complete in its devastation. Because, You Know You're Right, wasn't just Nirvana's final recording. It was Kurt Cobain's suicide note set to music. Every lyric was a confession. Every scream was a cry for help that nobody could answer. "Pain," he screams in the bridge. Just that one word, repeated over and over. Pain, pain, pain. And then, the final admission, "You know you're right." Who was Kurt singing to? Courtney? His fans? Himself? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the answer is all of them. Maybe Kurt was acknowledging that everyone who worried about him, everyone who saw him falling apart, everyone who tried to save him, they were all right. He was dying. And he knew it. 28 years after Kurt Cobain's death, You Know You're Right still haunts everyone who hears it. It's not like other Nirvana songs. You can't sing along to it at parties. You can't play it in the background while you work. It demands your full attention. It demands your grief. Music critics have spent decades trying to decode its meaning. Some believe it's about Kurt's deteriorating marriage to Courtney Love. The lyrics, "I will never bother you again," sound like a man removing himself from a relationship. Others think it's broader than that. A man removing himself from life. The music video, released in 2002, doesn't feature any footage of Kurt. Instead, it shows abstract images, a heart beating, flowers blooming, cells dividing. Life emerging and disappearing. The video feels less like promotion and more like a memorial. Courtney Love performed the song on MTV Unplugged on February 14, 1995, just 10 months after Kurt's death. She introduced it as a song that Kurt wrote, the last song, almost. She changed some lyrics and called it, "You've Got No Right." Watching her perform, it was like watching someone bleed on stage. But perhaps the most painful moment came in 2014, at Nirvana's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. 20 years after Kurt's death, Dave Grohl and Chris Novoselic performed together for the first time since that day in Robert Lang Studios. They didn't play You Know You're Right. They couldn't. Instead, they performed with Joan Jett, Kim Gordon, St. Vincent, and Lord filling Kurt's impossible void. The performances were powerful, but everyone in the audience knew the truth. There would never be another Kurt Cobain. In the years since his death, conspiracy theories have proliferated. Some people refuse to believe Kurt killed himself. They point to inconsistencies in the police report, the amount of heroin in his system, the positioning of the shotgun. They blame Courtney. They blame record labels. They blame everyone except the most obvious culprit, the devastating depression that Kurt sang about in every song he ever wrote. But, You Know You're Right, makes the truth undeniable. This is not the song of a man who was murdered. This is the song of a man who was disappearing, who was erasing himself, who was ready to crawl away for good. The borrowed guitar. The single vocal take. The back pain that made him lie on the marble floor. The resignation in his voice when he sang, You Know You're Right. All of it points to the same conclusion. Kurt Cobain was saying goodbye. Today, fans make pilgrimages to Seattle. They visit Veretta Park, the small plot of land next to Kurt's former home, where memorials are still left. They write messages on benches. They leave flowers, photos, handwritten letters to a man they never met but who changed their lives. And sometimes, if you're there late at night when the park is empty, you can hear someone playing "You Know You're Right" from a phone or a speaker. The song drifts through the darkness like a ghost. Kurt's daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, was only 1 year old when he died. She grew up without him, raised on his music and his legend. In interviews, she's spoken about the weight of being Kurt Cobain's daughter. The impossible shadow. The constant comparisons. But she's also said this: the most important thing is to preserve his humanity. He wasn't a god. He was a person who struggled. And that's what makes his music so powerful. She's right. Kurt Cobain's power wasn't in his perfection. It was in his brokenness. His willingness to sing about pain when everyone else was singing about pleasure. His refusal to pretend everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. "You Know You're Right" is the ultimate expression of that honesty. A man standing at the edge, looking into the darkness, and admitting the truth. He couldn't do it anymore. 65 days after recording that song, Kurt was gone. But his voice remains. Screaming, wailing, confessing, warning. If we had listened, really listened, to what Kurt was saying in that studio on January 30th, 1994, maybe things would have been different. Maybe someone would have understood that this wasn't just another Nirvana song. It was a cry for help disguised as art. But we didn't listen. Not until it was too late. So now we're left with the recording. The final piece of evidence. The last time Kurt Cobain poured his soul into a microphone and let the world hear his truth. Listen to "You Know You're Right." Really listen. Hear the pain in every word. The exhaustion in every scream. The finality in every note. And then ask yourself, how many other people are walking around right now, singing their own versions of this song? How many people are crawling away for good, and nobody's listening? Kurt Cobain's legacy isn't just the music he made. It's the reminder that behind every artist, every performer, every person in the spotlight, there's a human being struggling with darkness. Subscribe to this channel to honor Kurt's memory by sharing his story. Like this video if his music changed your life. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could help you understand the artists who shaped our world. And if you're struggling, if you feel like you're writing your own version of "You Know You're Right," please reach out. Talk to someone. Kurt didn't have that option in the way we do now. But you do. His final song was a warning. Let's make sure we hear it.